darkness has been generous lately. As I record this, Void of Fears stands just 1,000 subscribers away from our goal of 10,000 subscribers. Each of you who've joined us has fed the shadows. Every like, every comment, every subscription, they all strengthen what lurks beyond the screen. Your support carries us through the void. The entity watching over this channel sees your devotion. Now, let's dive into the void where tonight's nightmare awaits you. The blood won't wash off my hands. I've scrubbed until my skin is raw. But I still see it. Still feel it. The stains remain invisible to everyone else, but I know they're there. Just like I know they're watching me. Just like I know what's coming for all of us. My name is Dr. Thomas Walker. 3 months ago, I escaped from the most secure government facility on American soil with evidence of something that will change your understanding of life on this planet. I don't have much time left. They're closing in, and when they find me, well, death would be a mercy compared to what awaits. I need you to listen carefully. This isn't a story, it's a warning. The skin on my forearm split open last night. Not from an injury. It simply parted like a ripening fruit, revealing something dark and glistening beneath. I bandaged it tightly, but I can feel movement under the gauze. Whatever they put inside me is growing, spreading. Yesterday I coughed up something that resembled a tiny black sea anemone. It dissolved when exposed to air, but not before it had stretched dozens of hair-thin tendrils toward my fingers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what we found, what we woke, what's coming for all of us. 14 years ago, I was a nobody, just a biochemist studying extremophile organisms at Berkeley. My research focused on microbes that thrived in environments that should kill any living thing. Volcanic vents, radioactive pools, the crushing depths of ocean trenches. I had discovered a bacterium that could survive radiation levels 5 times the lethal dose for humans. The implications for medicine, for space exploration, for evolution itself were staggering. I published a paper theorizing about potential adaptations for life in truly alien environments, hypothesizing that life on Earth might have evolved from extremophile ancestors that arrived via meteorite or comet impact. 2 days later, they came for me. The men wore plain black suits, carried identification from a department that supposedly didn't exist. They spoke in flat, rehearsed phrases about national security and scientific opportunity. They offered triple my university salary, access to technology decades ahead of the public sector, and the chance to make discoveries that would reshape our understanding of biology. All I had to do was disappear. The recruitment process was a blur of windowless rooms, polygraph tests, and psychological evaluations. I was driven to locations in the middle of the night, interviewed by figures whose faces were always partially obscured by shadows or harsh backlighting. I signed papers threatening treason charges if I ever spoke about what I would see. Papers that explicitly mentioned non-human biological entities and containment protocols. I remembered feeling pride when they finally blindfolded me and loaded me onto the helicopter. I was going to Area 51, the place of legends. What a fool I was. The visible portions of the base were underwhelming. Just bland government architecture, laboratories that could have been in any research facility. For 8 years I worked in these upper levels, analysing unusual biological samples, believing the cover story that we were developing biological countermeasures against foreign threats. My team achieved remarkable results. We developed a synthetic protein that could neutralize any known toxin. We created a bacteriophage that could target and destroy specific cancer cells. We were on the verge of curing diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. All lies, all misdirection. We weren't developing cures. We were developing compatibility markers, testing human tissue against something else, something ancient. I didn't know this then, of course. I was just a dedicated scientist, working 16-hour days in a windowless laboratory, producing results that earned nods of approval from the stone-faced military personnel who observed our work. I earned trust. I earned clearance. And then came the day Dr. Jameson didn't show up for work. Jameson had been my mentor, the senior scientist, who had guided my research for years. He was brilliant, methodical, and lately increasingly paranoid. The night before his disappearance, he had pulled me aside in the parking lot. "They're lying to us, Walker," he had whispered, his eyes darting toward the security cameras. "About everything. I found something in the sample from batch 37. Something that shouldn't be possible." He slipped a small vial into my lab coat pocket, run a full spectrum analysis on this off the books, then destroy every trace. "If they catch you with this, they'll..." A security vehicle had rounded the corner then, and Jameson quickly walked away, leaving his warning unfinished. I never saw him again. The next morning, the base director summoned me to his office. "Congratulations, Dr. Walker," he said, sliding a new ID badge across his desk. It was identical to my old one except for the small L7 printed in the corner. "You're being transferred to level 7. Report to the central elevator at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Dr. Reynolds will brief you personally." His smile never reached his eyes. It was as if he was reading from a script, as if he was being forced to say the words. "What happened to Jameson?" I asked. "Family emergency," he replied without hesitation. "His mother is very ill. He's taken indefinite leave." Jameson was an orphan. He had told me this many times. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 12. That night was my last chance to turn back, to request a transfer to another facility. Sometimes I wake up screaming, wishing I had. Instead, I analysed the sample Jameson had given me. It was human tissue, skin cells, but with something else integrated into the cellular structure. Something that moved independently of the human cells, that seemed to be systematically replacing the human DNA with its own code. I destroyed the sample as instructed, but the images were burned into my mind. I reported to the central elevator the next morning, driven by a scientist's fatal curiosity. The elevator required a retinal scan, a voice print, and a numeric code that changed daily. The doors were 6 inches of reinforced steel that hissed as they sealed shut. The descent took almost 7 minutes, far longer than seemed possible. When the doors finally opened, I immediately noticed the difference in the air, slightly denser with a subtle metallic tang that never quite left my nostrils during my years below. The architecture was different too. The walls curved in ways that seemed unnecessary. The lighting recessed into ceilings that were at least 20 feet high. Armed guards stood at attention every 50 feet. Their weapons not standard military issue, but something more advanced. Sleeker, with no visible ammunition chamber or firing mechanism. They watched me pass with expressions that betrayed no emotion, no curiosity, no recognition of my humanity. Dr. Reynolds waited at the end of the corridor. He didn't look well. His skin had a waxy pallor, and dark circles permanently ringed his eyes. He walked with a slight limp that seemed to cause him constant pain. "Your samples came from here," he said without preamble, leading me through a security checkpoint that required both retinal and DNA verification. "Everything you've been studying originated from below level 8. Your work has been promising. That's why you're here." The laboratory on level 7 dwarfed anything on the surface. Equipment I'd only read about in theoretical papers lined the walls. Electron microscopes with resolution capabilities that defied current technology. Genetic sequencers that could map an entire genome in minutes rather than days. Containment units that could simulate any environment from the vacuum of space to the pressure of the ocean floor. A team of 12 researchers worked in eerie silence, their movements precise and rehearsed, like dancers in a macabre ballet. None of them looked up as I entered. None acknowledged my presence. They've been here longer, Reynolds said, noticing my observation. They've adjusted to the requirements of the work. Reynolds led me through a series of progressively more secure chambers. With each door we passed through, I felt a growing sense of dread, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back, to run. The final door required Reynolds to place his entire hand against a scanner that seemed to analyze not just his fingerprints, but the flow of blood beneath his skin. "What you're about to see is classified beyond any security clearance you've heard of," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "If you speak of this to anyone not directly involved in the project, the consequences will be severe." The door slid open to reveal an observation deck overlooking an enormous chamber at least 100 feet across. The walls were lined with what appeared to be tanks of varying sizes, each containing something obscured by cloudy liquid. "We're not studying foreign biological weapons, Dr. Walker," Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We're studying non-terrestrial biological entities, but not from where you think." He pressed a button on a nearby console. The lighting in the chamber below changed, becoming brighter, revealing the contents of the nearest tank. Inside stood a containment unit constructed of foot-thick glass and metal. Within it floated what I initially took to be some kind of giant squid or octopus, but all wrong. Its body was roughly cylindrical, about 7 feet long, with dozens of appendages of varying lengths. Its skin rippled with colours that shouldn't exist together, shifting between deep purples, electric blues, and colours I have no names for. The appendages moved with purpose, testing different sections of its enclosure, probing for weaknesses, but it was the eyes that haunted me. Clustered at what I presumed was the front of the creature were 7 eyes of different sizes. They swiveled independently, scanning the room, until all of them suddenly fixed on me. I felt a pressure inside my skull, as if something was pushing against my thoughts, trying to force its way inside. Reynolds gripped my arm, steadying me as I staggered back. "They can sense consciousness," he explained. "They're curious about new minds." "What is it?" I managed to ask, my mouth inexplicably dry. "This is just an infant," Reynolds said. "It was found in 1978 during an expansion of the facility. They broke through into a cavern system that shouldn't exist at this depth. A cavern system that was already occupied." He guided me to a different section of the observation deck, where a massive screen displayed what appeared to be a geological survey. The cavern extends for miles beneath the desert. It predates human civilization by millions of years. It's not natural. It was constructed. "By what?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "By them," Reynolds said, gesturing toward the tank. "Or rather, by their ancestors. They were here long before us, Dr. Walker. The fossil record suggests they first appeared on Earth roughly 500 million years ago. They dominated the planet until a cataclysmic event, probably a massive asteroid impact, rendered the surface uninhabitable. While most life was wiped out, they retreated underground, adapted, and continued to evolve." I stared at the creature in the tank. It had pressed one appendage flat against the glass, spreading it wide like a hand. The skin was transparent enough that I could see a skeletal structure beneath, not unlike the bones of a human hand, but with too many joints, too many fingers. "How intelligent are they?" I asked. Reynolds' smile was grim. "More intelligent than us, in ways we can barely comprehend. They don't think as individuals. They're connected somehow, sharing thoughts across a network we can't detect. They can manipulate matter at the molecular level, control electrical fields, and possibly perceive dimensions beyond our own." "Why am I here?" I asked, the reality of my situation finally dawning on me. "What do you want me to do?" "Your work on extremophile adaptations is key," Reynolds explained. "They want to return to the surface, Dr. Walker. But after millions of years underground, they need to adapt to our environment. Your research has shown remarkable promise in developing biological interfaces between their tissue and ours." His words hit me like a physical blow. Their tissue and ours? You're trying to create hybrids?
"Not trying," Reynolds corrected. "Succeeding. Come with me."
My work on Level 7 focused on understanding the creature's cellular structure, how it could change its molecular density at will, how it communicated without any apparent organs for producing sound, how its genetic material could integrate with human DNA without triggering rejection. The implications were both fascinating and horrifying. These entities weren't just intelligent, they were biological engineers, far beyond our capabilities. For 3 years, I lost myself in the research, barely noticing as my security clearance increased, as I was invited to observe experiments on living specimens, as I was gradually pulled deeper into the conspiracy. I told myself I was doing pure science, expanding human knowledge. I ignored the irregular shipments of volunteers, homeless people, illegal immigrants, prisoners whose records had been erased, who were taken to the lower levels and never seen again. I was a coward. I knew something terrible was happening, but the alternative, acknowledging the truth and acting on it, seemed impossible. The facility was a labyrinth of security checkpoints, armed guards, and surveillance systems. No one got out without authorization. No information escaped. Then came the breakthrough, or what they called a breakthrough. We successfully created a viable hybrid embryo, combining human and entity DNA. The resulting organism grew at an accelerated rate, reaching what appeared to be adolescence in a matter of weeks. It looked human, mostly. Its proportions were slightly wrong. Limbs too long, eyes slightly too large, and spaced too far apart. But it could pass for human in dim light, at a distance, and it could telepathically control ordinary humans within a limited range. The military applications were obvious. An infiltration unit that could pass for human and manipulate the minds of those around it would be the ultimate espionage tool. The entities seemed to encourage this line of research, communicating through a complex system of colors and electrical impulses that our computers had learned to interpret. In my 12th year at the facility, I was granted Level 9 clearance. That's when I saw the cavern. No description can do it justice. A vast underground space, at least 10 miles across, with its own ecosystem. Bioluminescent fungi the size of trees cast an eerie blue glow across the landscape. Strange insect-like creatures skittered through the undergrowth. Pools of liquid that resembled water but had the viscosity of oil reflected the ghostly light. And dominating the far wall of the cavern was a structure, not a natural formation, but something built by intelligent hands, something ancient. It resembled a temple of some kind, its entrance a massive archway carved with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. The entire structure was built from a black stone that absorbed light rather than reflected it, creating the impression of a vast void cut into the cavern wall. Carbon dating puts it at roughly 300 million years old, Dr. Reynolds told me as we stood on the observation platform. Long before humans, long before most dinosaurs, something intelligent was here before us, Dr. Walker. Something that went deep when the surface became uninhabitable. The excavation of the structure had been ongoing for decades. Teams of archaeologists, linguists, and engineers worked around the clock, carefully documenting and analysing every aspect of the temple. The interior was a maze of chambers and corridors, some so large they disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of our floodlights, others so small a human could barely crawl through them. The chambers were filled with technology we couldn't comprehend, devices that operated without power sources, materials that defied chemical analysis, and biological specimens preserved in a liquid that defied analysis. Some resembled the creature I'd first seen years earlier. Others were more humanoid, but with proportions that were subtly wrong, limbs too long, eye sockets too wide. "We think this was some kind of research facility," Reynolds explained. "They were studying themselves, their own evolution, and possibly preparing for our arrival." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The symbols on the walls, we've managed to translate some of them. They contain references to a species that would eventually dominate the surface. A species they could use." The implications were clear. These entities hadn't just been waiting out the cataclysm that drove them underground. They had been waiting for us, for humans, to evolve, to reach a level of technological advancement that could be useful to them. We weren't their partners, we were their tools. Then came the discovery that changed everything. It was a Wednesday night when alarms blared across level 9. A researcher named Michaels had been working alone in the excavation site when he breached a previously undiscovered chamber. By the time security reached him, Michaels was convulsing on the ground, black fluid leaking from his eyes and mouth. I was part of the medical team called to the scene. We tried everything to stabilize him. Adrenaline, anticonvulsants, blood transfusions. Nothing worked. His body was rejecting itself, cells rupturing and dissolving into the black fluid that now poured from every orifice. He died 30 minutes later, his body rapidly decomposing into a puddle of the same black fluid. But not before he told us what he'd found. "They're not dead," he gasped, his fingers digging into my arm as I tried to stabilize him. "The ones in the preservative, they're not dead, they're waiting." The chamber Michaels had discovered contained hundreds of preservation tanks, each holding what appeared to be one of the entities in suspended animation. The fluid had been disturbed when Michaels drilled through the wall, exposing him to particulates that had lain dormant for millions of years. The facility went into lockdown. Every preserved specimen was moved to maximum security containment. Reynolds ordered round-the-clock monitoring, but it was too late. The damage was done. Over the next few months, I documented a pattern of disturbing incidents. Researchers reporting vivid nightmares featuring the creatures. Security personnel experiencing lost time, minutes or hours where they couldn't account for their movements. Equipment malfunctions that couldn't be explained. Personnel developing strange symptoms, skin discoloration, sensitivity to light, increased strength, and reflexes accompanied by decreased empathy and emotional response. And worse, I began finding evidence of unauthorized experiments. Tissue samples from the preserved specimens being combined with human DNA. Recordings of test subjects experiencing extreme pain deleted from the official logs. Reynolds himself disappearing into the restricted sections of level 10 for days at a time. The most disturbing discovery came when I accessed restricted medical files. The volunteers brought in for testing weren't just being experimented on, they were being systematically transformed. Their bodies were being used as incubators for hybrid embryos, their nervous systems rewired to accommodate the entity's consciousness. The successful subjects, those whose bodies didn't reject the transformation, were kept alive but effectively brain dead, their bodies puppeted by the alien intelligence within them. I started keeping my own records, hiding data on encrypted drives. I recruited Dr. Winters, who had noticed the same inconsistencies. Winters worked in neurology, mapping how the entity's neural patterns interacted with human brain function. He had discovered something troubling. The hybridization process wasn't about creating new organisms. It was about transfer of consciousness. The entities were looking for new bodies to inhabit. Together, we pieced together the horrifying truth. This wasn't a scientific research facility. It was a breeding program. "They've been manipulating us from the beginning," Winters whispered one night as we reviewed security footage showing Reynolds speaking to an empty room, nodding as if receiving instructions. "They want out of that cavern. They want bodies that can survive on the surface." The plan became clear. The entities had been trapped underground for millions of years, unable to return to the surface due to environmental constraints, primarily the levels of oxygen in our atmosphere, which was toxic to their tissues in its pure form. They needed biological vehicles that could function in our world, while carrying their consciousness. But why now? I asked. They've had thousands of years of human civilization to attempt this.
Technology, Winters explained. They needed us to reach a certain level of technological development. They need our communications infrastructure, our transportation systems, our global reach. They're not looking to just survive on the surface. They're looking to reclaim it entirely. We planned to gather enough evidence to take to the outside world. We needed proof that couldn't be dismissed as conspiracy theories or delusions. We placed hidden cameras throughout the facility, copied restricted files, collected tissue samples from the hybrids. We were careful, methodical, but they were always one step ahead. My final year at Area 51 began with Winter's suicide. At least, that's what the official report called it. I found his body hanging in his quarters, but the bruises on his wrists told a different story. Clutched in his hand was a note with 2 words: Level 12. Level 12 didn't officially exist. No documentation mentioned it. No elevator button indicated its presence, but Winters had discovered something and died for it. It took me 3 months to find the access point, a maintenance shaft behind a rarely used storage room on level 10. The shaft descended into darkness, the metal rungs of the ladder ice cold against my palms as I climbed down. The air grew progressively colder and damper as I descended, carrying a faint organic smell that reminded me of low tide at the ocean, the scent of things that normally remain hidden beneath the waves. After what seemed like an hour of climbing, I reached a narrow tunnel that led to a massive metal door. Unlike the sleek, modern security doors in the upper levels, this was ancient, heavy steel with rivets, like something from a World War II bunker. It was slightly ajar, warm yellow light spilling through the gap. What I found defies explanation. A vast chamber filled with transparent tanks. Inside each floated a human body. Some I recognized as researchers who had allegedly transferred to other facilities. Their bodies were changing, black veins spreading beneath their skin, limbs elongating, features warping into something not quite human. Each tank was connected to a central column that pulsed with an unearthly light, and suspended within this column, within a cylinder of the same preservative fluid from the temple, was one of the entities, much larger than any I'd seen before. Its dozens of appendages stretched towards the central column, connecting with it through microscopic filaments. As I watched, one of the humans in the tanks jerked violently, black veins spreading across their body at an accelerated pace, mapping the nervous system like a topographical map of horror. The human's face contorted in silent agony, mouth open in a scream that couldn't penetrate the thick fluid. Then, suddenly the convulsions stopped. The body went limp for several seconds before straightening with unnatural precision. The eyes opened, but they were different now. The irises expanded until they consumed the whites, and they reflected light like polished obsidian. And at the center of it all stood Rodriguez, the head of security, overseeing a team of technicians. Only it wasn't Rodriguez anymore. His movements were wrong, jerky and precise like an insect. When he turned, his eyes reflected the light like mirrors. He moved with the uncanny grace of a praying mantis, deliberate, calculating, inhuman. I barely escaped unseen, my heart hammering so loudly in my chest, I was certain it would give me away. I scrambled back up the maintenance shaft, my hands slipping on the metal rungs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I made it back to my quarters and vomited until there was nothing left but bile. For the next week, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those tanks, those transforming bodies. I saw Rodriguez's inhuman eyes,
But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without proof. I began taking calculated risks. During routine maintenance periods, I accessed restricted database terminals. During shift changes, I collected tissue samples from secured labs. I placed miniature cameras, ostensibly for an approved experiment tracking researcher eye movements, in strategic locations. I downloaded classified files onto encrypted storage devices disguised as standard medical equipment. Each transgression could have meant my death, or worse, my transformation. Each day I expected to be summoned to some sterile room, where Reynolds would be waiting with armed guards. But nothing happened. Either they didn't notice my activities, or they were letting me proceed for reasons of their own. The more I discovered, the more horrifying the picture became. The facility wasn't just creating a few hybrid specimens, it was building an army. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, thousands of volunteers were being systematically transformed into vessels for the ancient intelligence. Documents I accessed showed similar facilities in remote locations worldwide: the Siberian tundra, the Australian outback, beneath the Sahara. The infiltration was already global in scale, with high-ranking military and political figures among the first to be converted. For weeks, I meticulously collected evidence, took samples, and prepared for my escape. I constructed a false identity, memorized patrol schedules, mapped blind spots in the security systems. I knew I would only get one chance. The opportunity came during a scheduled power system test. Once every quarter, the facility conducted a full diagnostic of its electrical grid, temporarily switching to backup generators. For exactly 7 minutes, the transition would create a brief window where certain security systems would be at minimal functionality. I spent weeks studying the test protocols, identifying which systems would be affected and which would remain at full capacity. I created a detailed timeline, mapping my escape route second by second. I stole medication from the medical bay, stimulants to keep me alert, sedatives in case I needed to subdue someone. I fashioned a rudimentary gas mask from laboratory equipment to protect against the sleeping gas that would flood the corridors if a full lockdown was initiated. The night before my escape attempt, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my quarters, staring at the ceiling, running through my plan again and again. So many things could go wrong. So many variables I couldn't control. But staying meant eventual discovery and conversion. I had to try. By morning, I had everything prepared. Keycards cloned from unwitting colleagues. Access codes memorized. A specially designed flash drive with terabytes of evidence, encrypted, and hidden in multiple partitions. I'd stolen a biological sample containment unit, replacing its standard contents with tissue samples from the hybrid creatures. I even had blood samples from Rodriguez, before and after whatever had happened to him. At precisely 3:47 p.m, the alarm sounded. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in pulsing red, and automated voices announced the beginning of the power system test. Personnel moved with practiced efficiency, securing sensitive equipment and experiments. In the controlled chaos, I slipped away from my workstation. I moved quickly but not suspiciously, a clipboard in hand as if on official business. The first checkpoint was simple, a swipe of a cloned keycard, a practiced nod to the guard. The second required a retinal scan, but I'd prepared for this too. Dr. Hendricks from Level 5 had a scheduled appointment in the medical bay. He never arrived because I'd rerouted his notification to a defunct terminal. His authorization still worked. The third checkpoint was the most difficult, a full DNA verification scan. No clonal sample would work. The system detected lividity and body temperature. This is where timing was crucial. During the power transition, this system would reboot, falling back to standard keycard verification for exactly 22 seconds. I counted down in my head as I approached, watching the lights flicker as the main power disengaged. 1 door, 2 doors, 3 doors, upper level, across a maintenance walkway, through the ventilation monitoring station. Each step precisely timed, each movement calculated. I avoided cameras when possible, used other personnel as visual shields when necessary. I reached the surface level through a rarely used emergency stairwell, my lungs burning, legs trembling with exertion and adrenaline. The surface level was less heavily monitored, a deliberate choice to maintain the facility's public facade as a standard testing range. I walked through the administrative section unchallenged, nodding to personnel who barely glanced my way. Just another researcher heading home after a long shift. Too easily, I realize now. It had all been too easy. At the final checkpoint, the one separating the interior of the facility from the vehicle pool and the outer perimeter, Dr. Reynolds was waiting. "Hello, Thomas," he said casually, as if we were meeting for coffee. His voice was oddly modulated, as if multiple people were speaking through him, a chorus of subtle whispers underlying his words. "Going somewhere?" He stood alone, no security personnel in sight. That scared me more than if he'd been flanked by armed guards. Whatever he had become, he didn't fear me. "Routine surface observation," I lied, gesturing to my clipboard, testing atmospheric samples for the biodiversity project. Reynolds tilted his head at an angle no human neck should allow. His face remained still, unnaturally so, not even the subtle movements of facial muscles that betray even the best liars. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" he asked, his tone almost disappointed. "The access of restricted files, the collected samples, the cameras you placed. Did you think we'd let you leave?" The corridor suddenly felt colder. The emergency lights seemed to dim, shadows stretching from where Reynolds stood like tendrils, reaching toward me. "What are you?" I demanded, my hand inching towards the syringe in my pocket, a last resort filled with a neurotoxin I'd synthesized specifically for this moment, a compound designed to target the unique cellular structure of the entities, to disrupt the electrical signals they use to maintain cohesion. Reynolds smiled, his lips stretching too wide, revealing teeth that seemed both too numerous and too sharp. "We are the original inheritors of this world. We evolved in the ancient seas, walked on land before your mammalian ancestors had even developed the brains to be afraid. We went deep when the skies burned. Now we return." I backed away slowly, but behind me I heard the soft hiss of a security door sealing. "You're using us," I said, playing for time as my fingers closed around the syringe. "Creating hybrids, infiltrating governments. Why not just reveal yourselves?" "Evolution through collaboration," he corrected, spreading his hands in a gesture that was almost human, but executed with a fluidity that sent chills down my spine. "Your species has potential. You're adaptable, resourceful. Some of you are compatible with our consciousness, capable of hosting our essence without immediate rejection. Most are not. But we're patient." His eyes, which had been normal human brown, began to change, the color bleeding away until they were simply reflective surfaces like mirrors showing twisted versions of my own terrified face. "We've had millions of years to perfect our methods," he continued, taking a step toward me. "Why conquer when we can simply integrate? Humanity will continue, Dr. Walker, just with better guidance." He stepped toward me, his movements fluid in a way no humans should be. Each step precisely measured, yet unsettlingly graceful. "Your research has been invaluable, Thomas. Your understanding of adaptive biology, your work on cellular interface mechanisms, it's accelerated our timeline significantly. You could join us willingly, Dr. Walker. Your mind would be preserved in a fashion, your knowledge integrated rather than simply harvested." He reached out a hand that now seemed longer, the fingers too thin, the joints too numerous. "It's painless for those who accept. The alternative is less comfortable." I backed against the wall, feeling the cold metal against my spine. Reynolds continued forward, his form seeming to waver slightly, as if the human shape was merely a suggestion rather than a physical law. "I've seen what happens to the volunteers," I said, stalling. "I've seen the tanks on level 12. Reynolds paused, his head tilting again at that impossible angle. "Ah, so that's how you found it. Winters left you a clue before we incorporated him. How human of him. A lingering sentiment, perhaps." As he spoke, I noticed something horrifying. His shadow on the wall behind him didn't match his shape. Where Reynolds cast a human silhouette, the shadow showed something with too many limbs. A body that bent in impossible ways. "He fought us," Reynolds continued, "right until the end. But now he understands. Now he's part of something greater." As he reached for me, I saw my opening. With a practiced motion honed through countless laboratory procedures, I plunged the syringe into his neck, my thumb depressing the plunger before he could react. The effect was instantaneous. His body convulsed, the human facade faltering as black fluid leaked from his eyes, nose, and ears. His skin bubbled like boiling oil, the neurotoxin attacking the alien cells, attempting to maintain control of the human host. He staggered backward, giving me just enough space to slip past him, but as I ran, his hand shot out with impossible speed, fingers elongating in mid-air to wrap around my wrist. His grip was like iron, the skin of his fingers rippling against mine, attempting to establish connection. "This body is failing," he hissed, his voice now fully alien, a chittering sound underlying human vocal cords. "But there are others, so many others." I wrenched my arm free, leaving skin and blood behind, and sprinted down the corridor. Behind me, Reynolds collapsed to his knees, but he was still smiling as I glanced back. A terrible, knowing smile that didn't belong on a human face. "We're already everywhere," he called after me, his voice gurgling through the fluid now filling his lungs and pouring from his mouth like black oil. "In governments, in military installations worldwide. This is just one hatchery of many. You can't stop what's already begun." Alarms blared throughout the facility as I sprinted toward the motor pool. Red emergency lights cast everything in a hellish glow. Personnel rushed in all directions, some responding to the alarms, others fleeing from something I couldn't see. One researcher ran past me, his lab coat splattered with black fluid, his eyes wide with terror. The neurotoxin would incapacitate Reynolds temporarily, but it wouldn't kill what he had become. I had minutes at most before the entire facility would be locked down, before every hybrid, every transformed human would be hunting me. The motor pool was surprisingly empty, just a lone security guard who turned as I burst through the door. I saw the moment of recognition in his eyes, followed by confusion as he reached for his sidearm. "Dr. Walker, there's an alert." I didn't let him finish. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it at his head with all my strength. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious but alive. Human, as far as I could tell. His movements had been normal, his eyes clear. I grabbed keys from the dispatch box, frantically searching for a vehicle with a full tank. A military jeep sat near the exit, fueled and ready. I threw my pack into the passenger seat, started the engine, and floored the accelerator. The outer gate was closing as I approached, heavy steel barriers sliding across the access road. I aimed directly for the narrowing gap, metal scraping against metal as the jeep barely squeezed through. Now came the hard part. The perimeter fence, 20 feet high, electrified, with armed guard towers every quarter mile. But I'd studied the security protocols, knew that during a level 1 alert, power would be rerouted from non-essential systems to the containment measures around the underground levels. The fence would be operating at minimal charge. I didn't slow down as I approached. The chain link barrier loomed ahead, illuminated by spotlight beams sweeping the perimeter. I braced myself, hunching low, behind the steering wheel and crashed through the fence at 60 miles per hour. The impact was jarring, metal tearing, glass cracking as the fence wrapped around the front of the Jeep. I kept my foot pressed to the floor, the engine screaming as I dragged sections of fence across the desert floor. Behind me, the guard towers erupted with gunfire. Bullets pinged off metal, shattered the rear window, punctured the back tires. The Jeep fishtailed wildly, but I maintained control, zigzagging to present a more difficult target. But I had studied the patrol routes for months, knew exactly which direction offered the best chance of escape. To the east, a dry riverbed cut through the desert floor, providing a natural depression that would hide me from direct line of sight. To the west, rocky outcroppings that would provide cover. To the south, the main access road where reinforcements would surely be coming from. I chose north, towards the most barren, inhospitable stretch of the Nevada desert. The direction no one would expect, because no one could survive out there for long, without supplies. But I had prepared for this, had hidden caches of water, food and equipment at strategic points across 50 miles of wasteland. The Jeep gave out 17 miles into the desert, the engine finally succumbing to bullet damage and overheating. I continued on foot, navigating by stars, moving only at night when the scorching heat subsided. I reached my first cache 2 days later. Water, protein bars, a handheld GPS, and a prepaid phone. I called the only person I could trust, an old college friend who had no connection to my government work, who lived off the grid in northern Montana. He asked no questions when I appeared at his cabin, a week later, dehydrated and delirious. He let me recover, gave me access to his computer equipment, helped me organize the evidence I'd collected. That was 3 months ago. I haven't stayed in any location longer than 3 days since then. I sleep in my car, in fleabag motels under false names, occasionally in homeless shelters where the lack of identification isn't questioned. I pay for everything with cash, avoid security cameras, wear hats and sunglasses in public. I've dyed my hair, grown a beard, lost 30 pounds through stress and constant vigilance. The evidence is my only leverage, my only protection. The flash drive contains everything. High-resolution photos of the cavern, microscopic analysis of the entity tissue, genetic sequencing of the hybrid embryos, 3D scans of the ancient structure, video logs of the experiments, including Reynolds's conversations with empty rooms, security footage of the bodies in the tanks on level 12, their transformations documented hour by hour, audio recordings of screams that gradually transition into inhuman sounds, video of Reynolds in his final moments, his body decomposing into that black fluid even as his mouth continued to move, to speak, to threaten. Most damning of all, I have a classified directive signed by military officials authorizing the integration program and outlining a 5-year plan for strategic placement of enhanced individuals within key government, military, and civilian infrastructure positions. The document is dated 1981, with addendums and progress reports spanning decades. This isn't new. They've been doing this for generations, working slowly, patiently, methodically. I've spent these months analysing the data, cross-referencing names and locations, creating a map of potential infiltration sites across the country, across the world. The pattern is terrifying. Every major military installation has a deep subterranean component. Every decade shows a steady increase in unexplained disappearances near these facilities. Political figures who dramatically change policy positions after medical leaves of absence. Military leaders who retire suddenly, only to emerge in private security firms with government contracts for deep underground construction. I have proof that something ancient and patient has been infiltrating humanity for decades, possibly centuries. But who can I trust with this information? Who isn't already one of them? 2 weeks ago, I noticed the first black vein on my wrist. A thin, dark line running from my palm to my elbow, pulsing slightly with my heartbeat. I initially dismissed it as a bruise from my rough living conditions, but it hasn't faded. Yesterday I found another on my neck, branching like a river delta across my throat. When I press on them, they feel cold, and I swear I feel movement beneath the skin. I don't know if it's some kind of tracking mechanism they implanted during my years at the facility, or if I was exposed to something during my escape. Perhaps contact with Reynolds, perhaps airborne spores in level 12, perhaps contamination from the samples I stole. But I know my time is limited. The transformation has begun. I've experienced other symptoms too. Increased sensitivity to light, enhanced hearing that sometimes becomes overwhelming in crowded places, periods of lost time, minutes or hours where I can't account for my movements. Once I found myself standing in front of a mirror in a gas station bathroom, fingers pressed against the glass, with no memory of having stopped there. Most disturbing of all are the dreams. Vivid, lucid nightmares of the cavern and the ancient structure. But I'm not myself in these dreams. I'm one of them, moving through the underground ecosystem with the familiarity of home. I understand the symbols carved into the temple walls. I recognize the faces of the others around me, and I feel their hunger for the surface, their patient anticipation of return. I wake from these dreams with my sheets soaked in sweat that has a faint metallic smell, and sometimes with words in an unknown language on my lips. Before the symptoms progressed too far, I tried to warn people. I've sent copies of the evidence to journalists, to foreign governments, to anyone who might listen. Most dismiss it as a hoax, the ravings of a conspiracy theorist, doctored photos and videos created with increasingly accessible AI technology. Some express initial interest, ask for meetings to discuss further. Those are the ones who have gone silent shortly after receiving the files. A reporter from the Washington Post, a professor of evolutionary biology at MIT, a retired general who now heads a prominent think tank. All express skepticism, but willingness to examine the evidence. All cease communication within days. Their social media accounts continue to post. Their bylines still appear on articles. They still make public appearances, but somehow I know they're not themselves anymore. The cadence of their writing has changed. Their movements in video clips have that same subtle wrongness I recognized in Rodriguez. I've gone to extraordinary lengths to remain hidden, but I feel them searching for me. In crowds, I glimpse people moving with that same insect-like precision. A barista whose hand moves too smoothly as she passes a coffee cup. A businessman whose head turns in small, mechanical increments to track passing pedestrians. A child who stands too still for too long, eyes reflecting streetlights like mirrors. They're hunting me systematically, patiently, methodically, just as they've done everything for millions of years. Time means nothing to them, and they have resources I can't comprehend. The ability to track by methods beyond human technology, to communicate instantaneously across vast distances, to perceive signatures of brain patterns unique to individuals. In my dreams, I see the cavern and the ancient structure, hear voices promising that I can still be part of the new world they're creating, that my transformation can be guided, made painless if I surrender willingly, that I'll retain consciousness, awareness, identity, just expanded, connected to something greater. They show me visions of what Earth will become under their guidance, a world where human potential is fully realized, where disease and aging are conquered, where the barriers between individuals dissolve into a collective consciousness that spans the globe. You need to watch for the signs. People who move differently than they used to, too precise, too efficient, no wasted motion. Individuals who
no longer need to blink at regular intervals. Officials making decisions that seem to follow some incomprehensible pattern. Policies that make no sense for human benefit but create perfect conditions for something else. An increasing focus on deep underground construction projects. Strange structures being discovered in remote locations around the world, always quickly cordoned off by military or private security. Unusual patterns of disappearances near military installations or mining operations. Most of all, watch for the coming announcement, the miraculous medical breakthrough that will be offered worldwide. A treatment for aging, for cancer, for genetic diseases. A simple injection or pill that seems too good to be true. It will be distributed globally, prioritized for military, government officials, healthcare workers. By the time its true purpose becomes obvious, it will be too late. They're patient. They've waited hundreds of millions of years in the darkness beneath our feet. What's another decade to them? They've been infiltrating us slowly, carefully, replacing key individuals, building their network. But soon, they'll have critical mass, enough positions of power to enact the final stage, the full conversion of humanity into vessels for their consciousness. I've started keeping a gun with a single bullet close at hand. A bullet would be too slow, too uncertain to stop one of them, but it will work on me. I won't let them take me back. I won't become one of those things in the tanks. I've made my peace with this end. The black veins have reached my face now, a delicate tracery across my forehead, down my cheeks. My eyes have started to change, the whites taking on a silvery sheen in certain lights. I'm losing time, more frequently hours vanishing from my memory. Sometimes I catch my reflection moving when I'm standing still, a slight tilt of the head, a blink that I didn't initiate, lips forming words I didn't speak. Last night I woke to find myself standing in the middle of my motel room, arms raised towards the ceiling, mouth open in silent communion with something I couldn't see. There was black fluid on my pillow when I came back to myself. Not blood, something thicker, something that moved slightly when I touched it. I can feel my consciousness being compressed, pushed into a corner of my own mind as something else expands within me. In lucid moments, like now, I fight it. But the moments grow shorter, less frequent. Soon there will be nothing left of Thomas Walker, just a shell with his memories housing something ancient and patient and hungry. If you hear this, spread the word. Not openly, they're monitoring communications, especially around certain keywords. Share this person to person, with those you trust implicitly. Create networks of awareness, people who watch each other for signs of change. Document your thoughts daily. Compare handwriting and speech patterns. Trust your instincts when someone seems off, no matter how slight the change. Watch the skies if you want, search for little green men and flying saucers. But the real threat has always been beneath our feet. They're coming up from below, wearing our skin, taking our lives, our identities. They've been here all along, waiting, preparing, and no one is looking in the right direction. No one is prepared for what comes next. The entities talk about evolution, about collaboration, about guiding humanity to its next stage. But I've seen the truth on level 12. I've seen what happens to human consciousness during the conversion process. It isn't evolution, it's extinction. It isn't collaboration, it's annihilation. I'm going to end this now, while I still have control of my own body, while I'm still human, while I can still choose my own fate rather than becoming a puppet for something that sees us as nothing more than convenient vessels. Remember what I've told you. Look beneath the surface, literally and figuratively. Question what you're told about those deep government facilities, those military bases, those private research installations burrowing into mountains and deserts. Ask why so many resources are being directed downward instead of upward. They're already here. They have always been here. And they're waking up. Sound of a gunshot.